I'd like to welcome you to my Thursday Bread History Seminar Workshop. I am broadcasting from my kitchen in Santa Cruz, California. My name is William Rubel. You can find my book, Bread, A Global History, at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online sources, possibly also at your public library. I'm writing a larger bread history, and really this work in the seminar series is feeding into this new work that I'm writing. So thank you very much for watching. You can go to my Facebook group, Bread History in Practice, join the group. That's where you will get notifications of the live seminars, and also you will see what people are posting who have attended the seminar. If you want to make breads that are mentioned, then go to my website, williamrubel.com. I don't have all of the recipes from each of these seminars posted, but increasingly I do. So you should look there first in the category seminar. Now I always start with the same two slides. And so I'm going to do that now. Bread is an invention, like a chair, a car, a shoe, or a necklace. There's no farmer anywhere in the world ever who has harvested bread from a field of plants. No farmer has ever plucked a bread from a tree. The breadfruit from the breadfruit tree is unfortunately just a fruit. It rots, it doesn't stale. Every choice the baker makes is a choice of culture. Which grain to choose, how finely to grind it, how finely to sift it, if at all, whether to have yeast or sourdough or flat, whether it's a big bread, a little bread, a flat bread, a thick bread, whether if it's a thick bread, it has an open crumb or whether it has a small crumb. All of those are inventions of culture because bread is an invention like a chair, a car, a shoe, or a necklace. Now, it's one of the most ancient inventions. And a lot of talk and a lot of credit is given to Egypt and Egyptians living 4,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago for bread inventions. And I don't think it's likely much of that is actually true. But what is true is that the Egyptian imagination was very, very heavily engaged with bread. Now, when you look up in the stars at night and you see the constellations, what you're not going to find there is the recipe for the best bread. Because the best bread, that recipe is in your heart, in each of our hearts. And it's different for each of us, even though a lot of us are right now clumping together with sourdough. And it also is changes over time. And the big challenge for thinking about Egyptian bread is how do we move back in time to feel bread as they felt it? And we're nowhere near there. But hopefully today, together, we can begin getting a little bit closer to Egyptian bread than we are now. This is a view from my hotel where I stay in Cairo. And this is the Nile, sort of the Nile. In the 60s, the Aswan High Dam was built, and that blocked the Nile from its traditional ebb and flow, the ebb and flow that fed the Pharaonic era. We're going north, and this is Luxor, and that's where my talk is really centered. What you see on the bottom is the Temple of Karnak on the east side of the Nile, and this is where tourists, all the tourists, that's the tourist part of town. I stay on the west side, which is only just now beginning to have any kind of hotels. And in those foothills on the left, where you see it's fading down, that's where we're going to be today, to the workers' village of Deir el-Medina. The Valley of the Kings with the tomb of King Tutankhamun is over to the right, a little bit out of view here. But where you see the green, that is the west side of Luxor that now is being irrigated. But in the past, the Nile rose and fell, ebbed and flowed with the seasons. But a season from Africa, a season from Ethiopia, and from the Nile's source. So what I want, and it came down. It's, you know, I think you all know this. There's basically no rain in Egypt. So it is, in a way, this utopian space where there's no rain. And yet, every year, the water rises, floods the land, reseeds, and you can plant. Because fortunately, this ebb and flow cycle was consistent with the way that wheat grows. So to get us into this, because really this ebb and flow is the rock center of pharaonic culture. What I want you to do, us all to do, is to take in a deep breath right now. So everyone, please do this. Slow, hold, and slowly let your breath out. And as you do that, you can imagine the waters of the Nile rising and then falling. Let's do that one more time. Now, these colossi of Memnon, they marked the furthest reach of the rise of the Nile. This is now a couple kilometers from the Nile. Beyond, if you follow, you've got that colossi in the middle, and then you see the mountains. And if you move to the left, that is again where we are going. And to the workers' village, the people who built the tombs, for King Tut, built the tombs for the Valley of the Queens, is over on the left, the Valley of the Kings over on the right. The river no longer comes here. The river is pretty dead. There's almost no fish in it. We're going to go beyond. And what you see down on the slide on the right is the remains of the workers' village. And 2 hours after the talk last week, it was announced that a complete city with walls 10 feet high, completely intact, full of everybody's things, was discovered right here, within, I think, less than a kilometer of where we are right now. They're calling it the Pompeii of ancient Egypt. So a ton of new information is going to come out. This man on the left is a guide, and he's pointing to his house. Until recently, people were still living right here where the tombs are, and there were openings for tombs in people's houses. They were only recently moved away. Grain and power. I'm just going to review a little bit from the beginning of the lecture last week before getting into this one. Grain and power. The entire edifice of Egyptian power was built on grain. The edifice of Mesopotamian power was grain. Hittite power was grain. Harappan power was grain. And that grain was all made into bread. The last tomb I went into in this last trip, which was 2019, January 2020, that was my second trip. I've been intending to go every year. That was my second time. I was there the year before. I obviously didn't go, 2021. I saw this painting of the woman in the tree with this bread. And this is the archetypal round loaf. I call it the bread of dreams. It's the bread of life. And I don't know the whole story here. But what's important is that it's a circle, that it's white. And white, as with us, is the color of purity. And it also has a red center. And red, this is an ochre center. And red was the opposite of white. And in the Egyptian idea about colors, it balanced it. So she's offering this completely balanced food, balanced dish. Quick diversion to Shahat. This is Shahat. This is his home. These are the kind of carvings that he makes on its actual limestone. And he sells them. You see the prices. If you're interested, please write to me and also to my assistant, taylorgreen@gmail.com. Whenever you write to me, you must also write to Taylor. And I'm currently working with him to develop some bread images as well. So if you're interested in an existing image, I can send you a list of images or a bread image. Let me know, and we will be in touch. And these are the prices. I just want to remind you all, I'm not going to do all of the slides from last week, that Egypt was not alone. I think because of the art and the stylized art, we kind of think of them as some people from an alien planet. They were not alone. And in the time which is most of my pictures are coming from, or all of them, the Middle Kingdom, 1500 BCE, roughly, Egypt continued up to the land of Canaan that most people know from the Bible, and right up to the border of what is today Syria. Above that, of course, Anatolia, you had the Hittite Empire, and they had wars. The first peace treaty in the world, official one between states, was between Egypt and the Hittites. The purple is Harappa, massive civilization in the Indus Valley, 6 million people, huge cities, running water, dentistry, all kinds of fancy things. We don't know anything of what they wrote because we can't interpret their language, but they also wrote. And they went back and forth to Mesopotamia and then also into Harappa. So we need to keep in mind that this was an open world, an open world. And I think a lot of information about Egyptian bread is going to be found or needs to be supplemented by looking at the Hittite world of the Hittite breads, and of course, what we can learn from Mesopotamia. And so you see here the cultic breads, and what today we're going to be discussing really are cultic breads. The only breads that we have from ancient Egypt are cultic breads that were made for tombs and has been preserved in their dry climate and are now in museums. Another big area we're not getting into today, it's just an introduction, but there was a whole world around these cultic breads and bread in general. So this is from cultite. Another consideration arising from the evidence of whether there's women bakers is this person is writing is an issue of purification, and said that when you made the cultic breads, at least in the Hittite culture, you had stringent cleanliness. The kitchen personnel, everybody who handled the food, everything had to be cleaning. I think we should presume that something similar was going on in Egypt as well. For another discussion, more research. Sorry, get my iPad where I like to have the talk also up so I can see my presenter notes. White flour. They had white breads. This is a magnificent carving. And when you go there, I mean, you've got to go to Egypt and see these things firsthand. I mean, look at the lines. Look what a beautiful, beautiful, amazing work of art that is. It's a conical loaf. It may have been molded. Most conical loaves were molded, but Delwyn Samuel has found conical loaves that clearly were formed. So as you're thinking about an Egyptian bread you might want to make, a conical formed loaf. We don't know how Egyptian was pronounced, but there's the phonemes, the phonetics, or the basic structure for what the bread looked like. Now I need to, sorry, I'm gonna have to escape out of this for a second. I apologize. Stopping the share. I've got to minimize this so that I can read properly. Where are we? we are back here. Okay. And I'll play this again. So this is a offering description of periodic offerings for Ramses III. I founded for 3 oblations at the feasts of the beginning of the seasons to make offerings before thee at thy every appearance. They were supplied with bread, beer, oxen, fowl, wine, incense, and fruit without number. They were levied anew upon the princes and inspectors as an increase of all the benefactions which I did for thy Ka. And here's another description of the beginning of a feast. Oblations of the festivals which King Uamare Mariama, the great god, founded for his father, Amon-Re, king of gods, Mut, Khonsu, and all the gods of Thebes during the 20 days of offerings of the festival called Uzamare Mariamam, making festival Thebes for Amon, from the first month of the first season, 9th month, day 26, to the second month of the third season, 10th month, day 15, making 20 days from the year 22 to the year 32, making 11 years, together with the oblations of the feast of the South Urn Opid, from the second month of the first season, second month, day 19, to the third month of the first season, day 15, making 27 days from the year 1 to the year 31, making 31 years. And here is a list of what was served at one of these festivals, at that festival. Fine bread, meat, rashu cakes, measures for eating 11,120. Just read this, guys. Look at this. Fine bread, 3,720. You can come down here, 5 bread, large loaves for eating 6,200, sweet loaves 24,800, loaves of the fire 16,665, large loaves 992,750, and it goes on for a total of fine bread. Look at the bottom of the left-hand column, 2,844,357. These people were nothing but precise, and the volumes of breads we are talking about boggles the imagination. Our poor Jeff Pavlik and others in this group who have bakeries would be unable to produce at these levels. This is industrial production, that we rely on factories to produce. Now, one characteristic of the breads, and these are extant breads, we're going to be looking at them more carefully to talk about copying them. I think Jeff just had a breakthrough for the little bread on the bottom right, is you can see there's white on them, okay? There's white on the bread on the left, there's white on the papyrus drawing on the right. This is a very coarse bread. You can see even from the poor low-res picture online, there's pictures of there's actually whole grains on them. I think you need to remember 2 things. One is, or maybe one thing is, these tomb breads may not have been intended to be eaten. The wooden oxen was not imagined to actually, be edible or to pull a cart. These are symbols in the tomb things. The tomb breads are symbols. They're symbolic of breads as well as being breads. And what's clear from the makeup of some of them, you can see that's very coarse. They have chaff in them. They have little pieces of granite, pieces of rock, of sand. Very likely they had sweepings from the milling surface. In the early modern period, I guess I haven't had a talk on horse bread. The mill sweepings were swept into the horse breads, as was the bran. And I think what you're seeing here are breads like that. But what's important is that they had a white surface. White, whether it's exactly pronounced hedge, we don't know. But much like with us, white stands for purity, innocence, sacredness. And where you've got the little snake figure and that circle with the dot in the middle, that is the hieroglyph for white. We've got the bright sun, In the middle, that is a painting of a bread. You see that it is round. It has this depression in the middle, and this is very common. The breads have depressions. Think of the woman in the Tree of Dreams. There's the bread with the dot in the middle. And they usually are depicted with little prick marks that we're going to see. And we see that also in the extant breads. Here you see little slash lines in the paint. I think what you're seeing here is the big disc represents the sun. Each of these side corners, these arcs, represent suns, and the center represents the sun. You've got another little mini one depicted in the middle, actually. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, 7 sun images. This would have been highly, highly, highly symbolic and meaningful to people of the time. So here you see also the hieroglyph for time. And here is another gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous painted bread. I mean, just eat your heart out. That looks to me like one of these painted Italian, Renaissance Italian plates. It's such a beautiful, beautiful work of art. But I think breads look like that. And one of our challenges is how do we do this? What is that white? What is that white? How can we do this? When you're making loaves, even little crude ones like this, note on the left the surface topography. Okay, notice the topography. It's not white, but you still see that there is a circle and a circle within a circle. So again, red and white are opposites. Together they signify balance. And I wonder if leaving some white, some brown in the loaf wasn't an analog for red. So these very fancy loaves really stood on their offering table as signs of purity, but also balance. The world is in order. Color in Egyptian paintings, you're going to find, as we get into the tombs, that the paintings are very naturalistic. I mean, you do have some gods with blue skin, but when we're looking with the natural world, pretty much the colors are the colors that we expect. There's white painted fingernails. What you see that the fingernails are touching is actually the bottom of a scallion, of a white onion. The Egyptians loved onions 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, and they love onions today. When you go have a breakfast in Egypt, you're often, well, there's onions at the table. You munch onions along with the bread. If you have any scallions in your refrigerator right now, pull them out and eat them with some bread. I think that a white bread would glow like the sun with some kind of a white flour paste baked into the surface. Now, it's not as simple as just white flour. I've tried that. But just imagine in one of those festivals and you've got 6,000 white breads painted white, glowing in the fierce Egyptian sun. Now, you know, what I try to do with bread history is bring the breads alive. And I don't have these Egyptian breads alive. But I think what we do need to sort of inch our way to feeling is the kind of multiple relationship that Egyptians will have had with some of these loaves that Christians have with bread. So with Christians, it'll be a familiar idea that bread is multiple meanings. It can be the literal body of Christ, body of their God. Also, it's just bread. It's the punishment for having tasted the fruit, the forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden, and yet it's also just bread. Multiple meanings. When we look at our own paintings, our own Western painting tradition from the 16th century, for example, and maybe Christ, like the marriage of Cana, is depicted with the bread on the table. It's a bit like this bread. Yes, it's a bread to be eaten at the wedding, but yes, it also means something more. Flowers were sifted and refined. And one challenge, I think, is to work out what happened to the different parts of the flour. Where did the bran go? Where did the middling goes? How white was white? Just to remind you of the weaving technology. This is a coarse cloth. This is a fine cloth. Clearly, these people, this is 2,300 BCE. So this is even before the breads we're talking about. There's simply no question that the finest sieves could have been made and were made. And this applies not just to Egypt. This applies to the Hittites. It applies to Mesopotamia. It applies to Harappa. So I'd like to look at a few loaves before we begin going down into the tombs. This one, and we're going to see another slide with a different version of this loaf. You note the smooth surface. You note the dots around the center. I think we can imagine those, or I'm imagining them now as the rays of a sun. And then you see that hole with cracking. So clearly there was a ball of dough, a stick is stuck in, and then quickly the dough is spread out. I say quickly because this could be a volume production. Now, if this is a bread to be eaten, then your challenge is, how do you make a bread that is so stiff that it will crack and yet has a crumb that is edible? There's a huge collection of breads at the Egyptian Museum in Turin. So go online, type in Egypt Museum Turin, and you go to their search box and you will find fabulous pictures of bread. They had bread molds. There's one on the left. I always think that we should be able to find inspiration in the past for the present. So while it's not going to be possible to instantly recreate Egyptian breads, but you can make breads for yourself. You can expand the repertoire in your bakery if you're a commercial baker, or your bakery at home. It's easy to get some low fire clay and make a form that you could use to mold bread. And then they made bread in shapes. I'm not going to talk about these loaves bound together, but Delwyn Samuel points out that we see that the ties are still tight, which indicates that there has been no shrinkage in the 3,000 years since these breads were made, so that we can assume that everything is essentially at 100%. It's cute. You might think about doing this later today when we get to the baking. Here's that same bread on the left. Delwyn Samuel thinks that it's a vulva, so female sexual organ, and that this one has been pinched. It's a very different dough than the one on the right. So I would also then like to emphasize that we're talking about a period of, when we say Egyptian bread, it's meaningless. It's a period of thousands of years. And while there was certainly consistency in artistic style, and certainly we know from our own experience, think of the host, those of you who are Catholic, the host, when you take communion, it's the same bread from 1,000 years ago, from 1,500 years ago. This is an ancient bread. So it's something in our experience that we know can have a lot of cultural stability. Nonetheless, there was a lot of variety. So I think we shouldn't get too uptight about copying any one loaf, thinking there's only one way, one dough to approach that shape. There may be other doughs. Again, notice the pricks. And again, this person is going really fast. Some of them are close together. Some of them are far apart. I think you need to think speed. So I'm not going to do it now, but if you double click and enlarge on that table, you're going to see the little pricks around the centers. This one on the right is a bread that I think is made with just sort of bran. I'm going to stop the share for a moment so that I can show you my own version of it. So my version of it is right here. I just took bran and some overtails, which is what's held back in the sieve, added some water, and then made a ball, stuck a stick in it, pushed it together. It's very, very, very fast based on Delwyn's interpretation of the other one. So this may be a female genitalia. Get us back together again. There we go. So this is what we're going to be seeing in the tombs, breads that all look like this. Oval and round. And one thing that you'll notice, these loaves that are a little bit oblong. Well, quite the shock when Jeff Pavlik started testing the other day for this talk today. He found that you make a ball of dough, you put your palm into it, and stretch straight out. It makes that shape. It makes that shape. So I think one benefit of what we're going to be doing today, working on copying the look of the breads, and so not trying to get to the core meaning of the recipe, but just trying to get to the look. Even then, we're going to get somewhere. A lot of these little ones have handprints on both sides, and some of the little fingers are very small. Delwyn Samuel points out in some cases it seems clear that there's children making the loaves. It's a triangular loaf. They're very, very common, and again, you can see that that it has the white. It has the white on it. My partner Jane Levi and a group member was with me in Egypt the last trip, and with the patience of Job, she made these sketches from the drawings. Jane, do you want to say something about them?
Yeah, I guess I could say something. Yes, I only had so much patience. I think I've only worked my way through about 5 tombs in these whole series of sketches. And what I was trying to do was, in a way, make sense of the massive variation that we were seeing, to try and sort of catalog these bread shapes and patterns in some ways, and also see if anything emerged that showed a pattern, that showed which ones appear more often than others, and whether that means anything. Of course, when the breads are by themselves and not in context anymore, we're kind of missing the dimension of whether it's in a tree, like that lovely picture that William was showing, or on an offering altar. But all the same, I was just trying to see what we could narrow down in terms of shape. And then once I'd started, realized that you'd need to narrow down further by shape and pattern, because there's variation at all sorts of levels of color, shape, pattern, and so on. And I wanted to do it by tomb, because I thought that might tell us something about periods as well, if we knew the excuse me, matched it up to the dates of the tombs and the dynasties.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Jane. So really what we have here, I would say, is a million ideas for breads. So again, if we can't quite get these down, and we're not going to be able to get them down right today, but these could provide ideas, I think, for breads that we make at home. And I think a goal certainly would be to make a little Egyptian bakery for your friends. This is the last slide, I think, before we begin descending into the tombs. This is the curator, Ahmad, at the Sohag Museum, which is a bit further north than Luxor. It's about a couple-hour drive. And what he's pointing to is a table for offerings, an offering table. And what we're going to be seeing, of course, not in the Egyptian way of painting, of depicting a three-dimensional space, we're going to be seeing this in all the paintings. You should imagine this piled with breads and fruits and a duck, and figs and wonderful things. So this is just above those ruins. You're climbing up behind them. And these are the kinds of signs. So we're going down into the tomb of Pashidu. These tombs are all numbered with TT marks. And when I say down, I mean literally down. In most cases, there's very nice stairways. And they're just extraordinary. They're both years I was there. There was a small team, an international team of wall restorers working on a tomb that's just being excavated just nearby. They'd been coming for about 5 years. For a couple of years, one of the restorers said she's just in there cleaning the wall with a skull, with a skeleton jutting out, right in her face, because they get filled with rubble, they get filled with stones. While it never rains, over a period of 1,000 of 3,000 years, we're talking 1500 BCE. It's 2000 now, so it's 3,500 years old. In the period of 3,500 years, while it never rains, it will rain enough that these tombs were often filled with rubble, and in some cases even some tomb damage. But mostly, this paint is exactly as it was, and they explained to me how I could tell whether it had been restored, whether anything had been done to it. She said you just look at it in a side light. If it's shiny, they put something on it, but otherwise, it's as it was. Coming here ruins you for going to other places where there's wall paintings, because these are so perfect and they are so gorgeous. This is a ceiling. It is a world of graphic design and things to imagine. There's my dreams. You look down into the tunnel and look at the dog. The god, sorry, aphasia for names right now. And look at that nice splatter pattern behind it. This is gorgeous, sophisticated wall art 3,000 some years ago. And of course, the breads were sophisticated also. There you've got your onions and you have your lotus. The Egyptians were very involved with scent. The lotus evoked a smell. And many of these breads will have had aromatics in them: coriander, fenugreek, and more. Many of them will have had them in it. This is a sketch, so this is not in the museum. This is, not in the tombs. This is a sketch for a tomb made by someone who was living in that in the workers' village. But notice the importance of those dots. This is another sketch. I just love this bread. That's why I put it here. A triangle off center. We don't see an extant bread like this. We don't see a painting of it. There's just this. So I also want to encourage you to be imaginative with your decorations. I think you need to imagine that rim, we will get to this, but no time like the present while I can remember something. This rim is probably because it's at a higher level. We can see that there's rims on extant bread. So I think you should imagine that a dough had been impressed with a form that pushed it down. And then there's a third layer where the dot is in the middle. There's the lotus. Look at this dot pattern all around it. You can see this bread is thin. It's sitting on that table from the Sohag Museum, and they're stacked up vertically. So this could be small. Delwyn Samuel says some of the breads are as thin as 5 millimeters, 5 to 10 millimeters, which is like a third, around a third of an inch, quarter of an inch. She's found some as thick as 50 millimeters, which is 2 inches. But I think with this one, we're probably down in the realm of, quarter, 10 millimeters, 20 millimeters, quarter, half inch. And you just walk and notice that there is nothing growing on the ground. This is a desert's desert. So this is the miracle of the former Nile, of the Nile, of the wild river, is it made a desert bloom. Otherwise, no one could live here. Again, I just want to encourage you to go to Luxor when you can, and trying to give you a sense of what it's like to be there. Most of these walls are exposed. You can walk. Please don't touch, obviously. A few of them have plexiglass over them, but really you are right there. And you are now allowed to take unlimited photographs with your digital camera, with your phone, not your camera, with your phone. There's also carvings, especially in the temples. So again, here, I think we need to imagine 3 different planes: a very distinct outer ridge, a depression, and then a third depression. So we're going deeper and deeper in this loaf. Did not mean to have it do that. I have my other one weirdly set up. What have I done? I'm going to stop share and get this. Oh, no, it is right. It is right. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Anyone want to say anything at this point? Any questions?
William, I just wanted to ask you, had you mentioned previously, or what are your thoughts about why the conical shape versus the round?
Well, there were conical breads were the breads that were fed to the workers in the pyramids, for example, but all of these projects. So there is a conical bread. I am not going to discuss it today, really, because there's experts on the conical breads, but I think it's a bread about like this. And we will have a separate session just on that, and we will have a guest speaker to do that. I'm hoping one possibility would be Seamus Blakely, who is currently working on this and is in the news often, maybe Delwyn. There's a French archaeologist who's done some very good work that was published in Science in December. I'm trying to convince her to come on. She's embarrassed about her English, but I'm working on her. So these breads also were made, so these were made in molds. Exactly how you do it is a conundrum that enormous amount of research has been gone into to do it exactly the way they did it. But also there were hand-built conical breads. Delwyn Samuel has demonstrated, has documented that. So you could also build your own conical breads. There also were breads made out of fruits. There's one conical bread that consists of 100% of fig. So you could make a fig loaf. Any other questions at this point? Okay.
William, somebody asks in the chat, how edible are these breads, or are they simply offerings for the gods?
Well, nobody knows. Nobody knows. Many of them are clearly not edible. They're not edible. They're full of chaff and grit and aren't edible. So a lot of them you need to assume are just for a stage set. I think that's the answer. we don't know. But what I think the relationship between these tomb breads and quotidian breads, the breads people ate, and the breads that were displayed at festivals, I think that the link has to be that these were favorite breads. Clearly, you're not gonna put up a bread that nobody's ever seen before. That you don't want to be introduced in your death to a bread you've never had. So I think you need to assume that these are favorite breads. I think you need to assume that many of them were white breads. Um, um, did that answer that question? Any other questions?
And did you talk about the dots? What are they symbolizing?
Well, my feeling is, now I'm not guaranteeing this, but I mean, my feeling is that the dots are probably sun rays. In other words, if we go with the concept that this round bread with the hole in the middle represents the sun, Ra, in art, you'll have the rays, the rays coming out. So I think symbolically, you've got this. You certainly could have made, you can say, why not that? I think they're making these breads in such incredible volume that, dots are the way to go. And also, they have symbolic language. I mean, these are people just like us. So they don't need to have the ray of the sun depicted as a ray. It can, you could have something symbolic. Again, this is my postulate. I've not read this anywhere. I'm just trying to make sense of it. Rather than have a factoid, if we can start to connect the bread to belief, then I think we can start creating an emotional space around the breads, which will make them more profound. Any other questions?
William, I just wanted to bring your attention to two comments in the chat. One, Erica Eisen has put a link to some images of Uzbek breads, and I looked, and many of them have that same kind of three
Great.
different, um, depths.
Do you want to
And
share that? Why don't you share it with us?
so you can see how there are
All right.
depressions in the middle.
Whoa.
There are many dots.
Whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Yeah, these dots are made with, well, I have a modern one. They're made, I'll show you later. They're made with these stamps that you can get on Etsy. Whoa, 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 whoa. Well, this is fantastic. Whoever, to you who posted this just now, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And we may find, in working on these breads, we may find by looking at breads from Uzbekistan and the Caucasus, we may find techniques that that can apply. So thank you. I think you can stop sharing now.
Okay.
Any other questions?
And one other comment I will read from Maxwell Schexer. Thought on the cracking around the edge. If the impact from the rod was so fast and forceful that it caused the cracking, versus what we would see if we gently push a divot, I've observed similar force-dependent behavior, and it may not even be related to gluten breakage, as cracking under sudden impact occurs in non-Newtonian fluids.
Wow. Okay, another scientist here. That's a very interesting observation. So we have to test it. That's all. I think what we're going to find with these breads is that there was that, of course, all the flour was used, that you had bran, you had white flour. When you have white flour, you always have middlings. You always have the thing that's held back in the sieve, right? What comes through the sieve is called throughs in English. What's held back in the sieve is called overtails, is the technical word for it. And that generally is the part of the grain that in American English is called middlings, in British English is called semolina. And these middlings, by the way, can be further refined. In early modern breads, as you know, those of you who've attended my talks, the middlings were used for prison breads. They were used for breads for the enslaved, but they also were used for breads for prisoners, as I said. But when they're extra refined, they made the absolutely fabulous, most elite French bread in the 19th, 18th, and 19th centuries. The French had an entire bread baking tradition based on super refined middlings. So this also could have been the case with the Egyptians. Remember, we've got unlimited money here, so unlimited labor. So I think one of the questions as we're working and thinking about the breads is, where did the bran go? Where did the middlings go? Where did the white flour go? And was there a kind of flour in between? Now, I'm about to get into the ingredients, and then Jeff Pavlik, I think we all can see, is working in his bakery, is going to demonstrate some breads, and then we'll be in each other's kitchens right now, and we'll move back and forth. You can share screens with what you're doing. One warning that Adelwyn Samuel gives in her big work on bread, which is her doctoral thesis from 1994. You can all download it from her website, or ancientgrains.org, or if you type in Adelwyn Samuel 1994 thesis, Cambridge, University of Cambridge website will come up, and the download is free. It's an old PDF. It's massively large. You should open it, and then you should optimize it so that you can more efficiently save it. It comes up at like 340 megabytes. It's ridiculous. She says, look, beware, beware, beware. You cannot approach these breads just as a modern baker. You can't just put flour and water to the dough and expect it to exactly work. And Jeff is going to demonstrate that. Remember that log I showed you, that taper. He's worked out, I think, the dough that makes that taper. And it's not just the flour and water off the shelf that we're used to. I am going to share again, and then, maybe in the first time in history, we're going to be more or less in time. Issues for further study. There's tons of issues for further study. And if anybody really wants to help with some of this, I can always use help. Questions are here, how did life, sorry, we don't need to be sharing for this. How were these breads used in real life? Like, what were the real life breads? And then we know that there's these mixtures of fenugreek, of coriander, of this, that, and the other thing to make fabulous tasting breads. We should experiment and see about making good breads. We don't know what that white surface is. It hasn't really been properly analyzed. And it's some kind of a paste. It's got to be white because we still can see it's white. I've tried lime, plaster. I mean, this right here is one I made this morning, a triangular loaf, just with white flour. It doesn't work. It bubbles up. It doesn't adhere to the surface. I made this beautiful one. Whoa! Everybody's impressed. But this is lime. Actually, when I make nixtamal from making tortillas. So this is plaster. It is edible. For a while, I was thinking, well, maybe the white on tomb loaves, was just decorative, and nobody expected them to be eaten. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's not true. There's something called the mathematical papyri. So people were paid in wheat, in grain, in a size called a heket, and we know exactly how much it was. I think it's quarter pound, but I may be not remembering it correctly. You were paid in grain, and the grain you received was either in the form of bread or beer. And then these mathematical documents, which is the basis of teaching Egyptian mathematics. There's all kinds of formulas for converting um, units of bread to units of beer to units of bread. And I think that if we really get into those, that we may be able to learn something about extraction, flour extraction rate. I do believe I have one recipe that I found hidden in a scribal record talking about an inventory. So I think really searching scribal documents for bread recipes would be useful. And then, what were the rituals? What did people really feel about bread? We don't know. The Egyptians had lots and lots and lots of writing, 3,000 years of writing, more than 3,000 years of writing, but absolutely nobody bothered to write down what they ate for dinner, what their lover gave them when they were wandering in the fields, trying to find a private place to kiss. Nobody wrote down what was a good bread, a bad bread. No novels were written. There's no information, no journals. Nobody wrote, oh, I went to such and such a place and you can't believe the bread made at this bakery. Let me describe it to you. All the kind of secondary non-cookbook sources from which we actually do have lots of information about bread. All of that is lacking. A quick share before we turn this over to Jeff. The breads were made with hulled barley and emmer. Free threshing wheat wasn't popular. That's not how you spell estivum in this estivum form. So free threshing wheat was brought in by the Greeks in the Ptolemaic period in about 300 BCE. There is evidence. This is an example of the peth soup problem. Sorry. This is how they wrote numbers: 7.5, 1/4, and 1/8 hecate of meal is made into 100 loaves of bread. What's the amount of meal in each loaf, and what is the pethsu? And this explains how you do it. And my question is, well, it may turn out, can we figure anything out from that? Anything figure out? Size of loaf, extraction rate, what does it mean for us? We've got these strange stamps in the Egyptian Bread Museum, tons of them. What do they mean? Were they for breads? Were they for breads? All right. So this is a recipe from around 1330, not in our period. This is translated and written by Charles Perry, who I will invite to join us for a session and lead a session on Arabic breads. I'm always putting everything off to the future. Recipe number 1, take the finest white flour and add fenugreek, oak moss, sourdough, and the flavorings described for the making of kak. Knead with milk, 1/3 of kg of clarified butter for every 2 kilos flour. Add to the milk, knead the bread, punch it down well, leave to rise completely, flatten onto the wall of the clay oven. It turns out nicely. Thank you, Charles, and for this recipe to remind me that there were tandoor ovens, which is the oven that most of us will know at least from Indian restaurants, where you are slapping the bread on the side of a hot stone. So this is the kind of thing that we need to be imagining in the real breads, in these real breads. On the top, you just see an oval flatbread. Here's oval flatbreads. It doesn't need to be that what you're making is super exotic. So today, if what you have is modern bread flour, make a disc like that. Make a disc like that. And you can know that you are right. So I would use Delwyn's 5 to 10 centimeter width, 1/3 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch thickness. Make a nice, beautiful little flatbread. This on the right is one where I was using white flour to make the form. I think I've got a look there. I obviously don't have it quite right. And here are my simulacra. As I said, I do think there's a benefit in just seeing what we can do. So there is the end. I'm going to stop sharing. Any questions, It's 10:10. I'm right on time to turn over to Jeff to talk about the amazing baking that he's done. Anybody have any questions at this point? Jeff, I'm going to put you off for 1 or 2 minutes. Is there anybody here, because we had a late start, who would like to introduce themselves to the group? Anybody here who would like to introduce themselves, have not been here before, are from far away? Anybody from Egypt here right now? Did you make it? Elizabeth.
Hello, William.
Hello. You may introduce yourself.
Ibrahim.
Ibrahim Mahmoud. Oh, okay, here's Ibrahim himself. And we saw your video. And
Hello.
hello. My best for Ramadan. Thank you for coming. Anybody else from Egypt here today?
Thank you.
All right. Anyone else want to
Thank
introduce
you.
themselves?
I'm William's brother, and I just find these fascinating, so I will introduce myself. Hello, I live in Austin.
Thank you, William's brother.
Yep.
Anybody else here? Peter, who we spoke with earlier, Peter Wiegels, would you like to introduce yourself? Talk about what you do a little bit?
Yeah, I'm eating, so sorry.
Okay.
It's dinner time. I'm Peter Egels. One of my hobbies is archaeology, amateur archaeologist, but I'm also very much into bread as a profession, working in product development, and of course also much interested in this series of very inspiring talks.
Well, thank you very much. Any questions or comments on what I've said so far? From you also said you specialize in gluten.
Yep.
Any comments, or are you okay with what I've done so far? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
Okay.
it
Anybody
was
else? Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Let's move on to Jeff.
Mute myself. All right, so I'm unmuted now.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. Hi, my name is Jeff Pavlik. I'm a baker here in the United States of America. I live in Michigan in the Midwest in the Great Lakes. So we've been working on this. Some of the original, we originally started with wheat flour, modern wheat flour, high gluten flour, and it was really easy to make some of these patterns and shapes. Then we delved into emmer flour, because that's what they used. The emmer flour that I was able to get my hands on is actually from India. It's samba flour. Samba wheat is emmer. We did some research and found out that it's still grown in particular areas of India and still used. So that was the kind of emmer I got. Now, we don't know, I'll have to get more types of emmer to see how, if there's a difference between Indian emmer and maybe emmer grown somewhere else in the world. It's a very interesting flour, though it's, part of the wheat family, it responds incredibly differently. And it wasn't until you get to the end of that thesis that William talked about that the author says basically like, if you are a modern baker, forget everything you know, it won't work. I wish she would have put that in the beginning, but it was good to know that all of our failures were just, bearing out what they had learned as well. So the actual flour, we're looking at like 80% hydration, and we're still getting this kind of weird crumble mix. We can kind of push it together and make a ball, but it's not really extensible. It's nothing, it's not gluten as we think of it.
Peter, Jeff, stop for a second. So when he says 80% hydration, he means that for 100 grams of water, there's 80 grams of flour. 100 grams of flour, there's 80 grams of water. So that hydration is moving into ciabatta range for us. So a classic French loaf with giant holes will be between 75 and 80% hydration. Ciabatta is between 80 and 100, but you just mix 80% hydration to your Triticum estivum subspecies estivum flour that you have in the kitchen. It will not be crumbly.
Yeah, you'll have a nice extensible dough. I mean, we're not getting, we talk about window panes and all that when we're making dough, how you need it. This isn't going there. This is going to stop. In some of the reading, they talked about the gelatization of the wheat, that they're sprouting some of the emmer and then boiling it to get a starch. So we did that with the middlings. We took some of the middlings, that middle flour, and we boiled it, and then that makes a paste. If you mix that paste with the other emmer flour, we're really getting much more of a dough that we can work with. So we can see where this was actually a useful way of dealing with these lower gluten products. Peter, that is joining us today, we were talking before the seminar, and he was saying that it's very common with rye flour as well to do that, which is true. I don't do it with rye flour myself, but I've heard of it. That's great. This is how we're using these grains that we're not used to. So here's a bunch of shapes that we did. You'll see these, you've seen all of them. One of the problems that we were having was it was cracking. And we're also concerned about how do we get that whiteness to it. What I've figured out, this is exciting today, is that if we take and we sift some of that grain off. So this is the middling flour, the sifted flour that comes off, and we have just the finely sifted emmer flour. Add it to water and make a paste. It's not white at all. It's still a gray paste. After this was about halfway baked, I don't know if this is how it worked or not, but after I took it out and then I put it on there, you can see how white and smooth that is. So this is without the paste and this is with. You can see the obvious color differentiation.
Wow.
This is really cracked. The paste filled in the cracks. So we have this smooth look to it, and it's obviously just a different color. So maybe
Jeff,
that
you're saying
points to something.
So it's a middlings paste that gave you that.
No, it was the fine flour paste. I took the middlings out so that it would just be the finest flour.
Okay.
And the actual dough is made with the 100% of whatever this miller gave me. It doesn't have the spikelets. Emmer has spikelets, not like it's a different plant than the wheat that we're used to. So this is a whole grain, this is not sifted, the flour, but the actual paste I made with a sifted flour, and it filled in and made it smooth.
And is that fully baked? Wait, Peter, Jeff, is that fully baked?
Yes, fully baked. I baked it, took it out, put the paste on there, put it in for a couple more minutes, and then it came out beautiful and white.
Do you have a light you could shine on it to make it glow?
No, it's a cloudy day in the Great Lakes, like usual.
Okay.
That's about as much sunshine as we get in this state.
Okay, I think that's really nice.
Yeah, but you can definitely see the differentiation in color. But
Can
this
you rub
definitely
it?
shines
How
white.
much does it adhere? Can you rub it?
Oh no, it's just on there, right? It's on there. It's baked on there as a paste, and you can see it maybe on this side. You can see how where the paste stops and the cracks start.
Okay, well done, Jeff.
Yeah, so that was, I mean, and they talked about that paste, but yeah, we see all these cool shapes. We see some of this stuff sticks together, holds together more than others. I still get a lot of these cracks. We don't know how to work that out yet, but as we're learning how to use this emmer, it's an entirely new substance. But these shapes are beautiful. They're not hard to make. They taste fantastic. It's a very nutty grain. It's the dough itself is a little soft on the inside. There's no crumb to it. As we think of a crumb of bread, and it's definitely just a solid substance, and will dry out different sizes. So,
thanks. All right.
Yeah, no problem.
Who wants to start baking in your kitchen? So everybody got some flour. Who wants to has anyone else done any baking from the slides that from the recipes that I posted? Anyone done any work? Anyone raise their hand? Anybody? No? Anyone want to start doing something now?
Kimberly, have you made bread? This bread?
Well, I have one that is kind of a disaster. I think for this one, it was before the gelatinization. So I was using, I thought if I used barley flour, I would get somewhere. In one of the pictures of the recipes from the face from that I posted on in my blog, you can see a real, let me look at that bread. I'm going to show you the bread. It has a distinct ridge. So does anybody want to share from their kitchen, or do you want me to move ahead? All right. Then I'm going to share. How am I going to do this? Um, okay. So the kind of detail can you all see this bread here? Do you all see this? Is there a yes there? Hey, Chum?
Yes.
That's
Okay. So look, this applies to recreating Egyptian loaves that you see online. It also relates especially to this oft poorly copied loaf from Pompeii that I will deal with in a separate talk. I want you to focus on this. So would somebody please talk to me about what they see here? Someone be brave. Max. Okay, Peter, do you want to be brave?
yeah, maybe I see some, it seems some seeds, some black cumin or something.
I actually think those holes, yeah, that's an illusion. Those holes are insect holes.
Ah, okay.
So what I'm trying to get at is look at this ridge here. Do you see this ridge?
It looks as punched.
It's sharp. It's crisp. So I want you all to go to my website later and enlarge this picture. You can also find it online. I believe this is at the museum in Turin. Notice it's crisp. Then there's a gentle, so again, this center plane is below, below grade, if you think of the grade here. Then there's a big depression, plate-sized depression, that goes down towards the center, which yet again has a deeper depression.
I have one here, William.
Okay, hold on. Okay, do you have the crisp edge?
Yeah.
Okay. So I just want to say that when you reproduce it, those kind of things becomes sort of a technical challenge. Your question is, how do I make a dough that's going to bake up into a palatable bread that retains a crisp edge? If there is no leavening, so the thicker the bread, the more it needs to be leavened, unless you have a coarse dough. So a bread that's basically made of bran, it pretty much doesn't need leavening. It could be an inch thick, 25 millimeters, and it's still edible. But if you have just like white flour, it would be inedible. So how do you make without leavening? But if you leaven it, you will not get that crispness. So for each of these breads that you look at, I want you to look at a detail that is critical to it. Well, it's kind of rounded. I don't think it's quite as crisp as that is, Jeff. It's good.
You can see the shadows.
Yeah. The other one has an actual line.
William,
Yes.
is there any chance it's a knife cut? Has that been ruled out
Absolutely not, Mark.
before it's baked? That's what I'd like to try one of as well.
Mine was just a bakery weight. I just threw a weight in there.
Well, maybe try something that has a sharper edge.
Oh, well.
So I think, anyway, that's the challenge on these things in terms of making an actual simulacra. And I think that as we work towards the simulacra, we will arrive at some kind of truths. We will get someplace that is meaningful. Any other questions? Anything from the chat, Hechung? Someone says prep cooked in a vessel. I don't think that one is cooked in a vessel, but you could try it. And that's because it's irregular, because because the other depressions are irregular. And I think Jeff has found that a lot of this work is by hand, is hand forms. And I think Delwyn Samuel also seems to find that in her analysis of the breads. Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right.
These are phenomenal.
So I didn't show this bit because it's very common online. It's shown all the time, but let's see if I can get to it. Okay, I'll share here the Bakery of Ramses III. So what we have here, there are several bakery scenes. This is the most famous one. It's also again in this New Kingdom. So to the painting on the wall was in beautiful condition, and I think the 1830s, and then they didn't take care of it. The place got flooded, and the image was destroyed.
We're not
so all
seeing
we
it,
have,
William.
are you seeing it?
We're still seeing that bread with the crisp ridge.
You are still seeing that bread with the crisp ridge. Okay, let's quit. So how about
And
now?
obviously the bread is good because Jeff's having great fun eating it.
Okay, how about now? Okay, do you see this?
Yep.
These are last 3 minutes here. All right, talk fast. So the painting has been destroyed. All we have is a drawing, and then these drawings of the drawing. People are now currently working on that painting with fancy equipment, hoping that they can somehow restore it. So on the left, this is interpreted as stomping grapes for must for the bakers, okay? So it's imagining that these people are taking that must and carrying it in those containers over to the bakers in the bakery. So grape must, a possible form of leavening or sweetening for the bread. That circular bread that Jeff was looking at making, so that is interpreted as something that was boiled in water, like the bagel is the bread we are most familiar with that's boiled, and then baked in that tandoor oven on the side. You can see the cow image up there. I will show you again my little cow image when I go off. But if you have any Christmas Easter molds, make a bread. Pyramid molds, make a bread. Those would be leavened. And then you can see also they've ceramic molds. You basically here you're seeing the breads from the tombs. Again, the emphasis on the circle and the dots. They really want you to see that. That's your basic form. These molds are very crude, very low fire, very easy for us to make. This is what's left of my most recent little guy. Makes a very nice cross section, and that's in molds. Looks like this. This is a French one. You can probably start looking at eBay for this kind of thing, or some other online source. And if you're really brilliant with clay, you can, of course, make your own. Any questions?
And maybe a remark: if you boil the dough before baking, then it won't crack because you have your gelatinized starch at the outside, and it will dry out, and you will get a very nice shiny crust. Is that something they see, or that you can see on the archaeological finds, or not?
I think that it is. I mean, certainly we can see with that bread, that's the vulva bread, the one especially that was pinched, had a very, very shiny outside. In fact, both of those did. So you're saying that would come from gelatinized?
Yeah, if you first boil it, there's also what Jeff showed. If you have a kind of how do you call it, the flour mixed with the water, then you have a lot of water on top, and then your surface won't crack. Depends on the amount of water you have in your topping. We have a process which we call tiger bread, and then you use also kind of a liquid paste, put that on top of the bread, and during baking it gives you a very nice structure.
I grew up, we called that Dutch crunch bread.
Oh, that's okay. I'm explaining it too complicated then.
Dutch.
We
So
call it
how would you
tiger
make a
bread.
crust? So how would you make a crust that was white and didn't crack? Just what he did.
Yeah,
What-
I was thinking first maybe that's the ashes from the fire, because sometimes you see bakers turning their bread in when they have a wooden oven, for example, to put it in the ashes. I don't know.
Mhm.
I never looked at it. Maybe they did analyses on the white stuff if it's really the flour, because then you can see if it's baked like this, you even can see what kind of starch kernels are in.
They haven't analyzed it very much. They've just done an iodine stain on it so that it,
Okay.
I can't remember if it stains blue or red, but
If it blues, then there's native starch.
right.
So if you
Red-
have uncooked, yeah, that is also, then Jeff is right that he does it at the end of the baking, because if you would put that paste in the beginning of the baking, the starch would gelatinize, and then it wouldn't give a white color.
So right, is that right, Jeff? So you took it out and put the paste on part way through. Is that what you said?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
okay.
I was just
didn't-
looking at her thesis. Yeah, she doesn't say, she just says that it's a paste. I mean, yeah, she gave us the idea that she thinks it's a paste that's put on it. She doesn't state whether or not it's before or after baking. I found that putting it on before baking, it didn't quite get the same color.
Yeah.
But after the dough was partially baked and then just slap it on, it really gave it that
Okay.
pop.
I think you've got it. It has to be simple. Elizabeth Erbach, I'll take your question, then I will formally end the meeting but keep the room open.
Hi, so I was not initially planning on trying to bake it because I didn't have emmer flour or barley, but I thought I heard you mention semolina as the middlings of wheat flour. And I do have semolina and I do have whole wheat flour. Would I get a similar outcome if I sort of boil the semolina and then mix the flour in that same technique? Do you think it would
Well,
turn out
I think
similarly?
I think you would, and so just explain to you what that semolina is. That semolina is the free threshing form of emmer. So it's triticum turgidum
Durham.
and emmer is triticum turgidum dicoccum, using the modern trinomial naming system. So it's a different wheat, but I would think that might be nice to use. I would try that for sure. And again, I had recommended using the whole wheat rather than the white flour, because often our fine whole wheat is similar to historically refined white flours, like the whole of the wheat that I mentioned from early modern.
And also mention farro. Remember we talked about that sometimes
Well,
farro is
farro-
made of emmer wheat.
Right. So farro is an ethnobotanic nomenclature from Italy. There is no grain called farro. Farro just means a hulled grain. It could be einkorn, it could be emmer, or it could be spelt. So,
But it's an older grain.
we'll talk about what's old and when we get to a history of grain. Yes, they're older, but the sequence might not be what you think. Einkorn is first, though. And they're also ancient. That I think it's a ridiculous argument. But what I'd like to do is formally close the session today. Thank all of you for coming. I hope to see all of you in 2 weeks, plus your friends. I'll get it posted soon so you can register. And thank you very much. I'll leave the room open for another 25 minutes.